So recently we were in France visiting family and friends, and we stumbled across, we were trying to figure out what to do with our time, really, because we were just kind of hanging out. So we do day trips to various towns and things like this, and we found that there is a Snøhetta project located somewhere nearby to where we were, and we got to go see it, which is kind of cool. What was the project?
It's called Lascaux IV. It's in Montignac, which is kind of the center southwest of France, almost a perfect triangle between Toulouse and Bordeaux. And Lascaux refers to, I think, the biggest site where they have parietal paintings in like caves and stuff. And it's Lascaux IV because I think it's spread over like 4 or 5 sites. So this one is one of them. There's actually no cave in that particular building or location.
Where was the actual cave located? It's right nearby.
It's in the
it?
same. They're all in the same in that town in Montignac.
Right.
Yeah.
So basically, the building is titled Lascaux IV, the International Center for Cave Art. It's basically a museum of cave art in a way. This cave was found in the
I think 1970 something.
I don't know, something in the 1900s. I guess the story is there's a dude.
1940, I think.
1940. This guy walked around with his dog, and the dog found a hole, and they went down. There was a cave with all this cave art, extremely well preserved, advanced cave art from the how many thousands?
20,000 years before. Jesus.
20,000-year-old paintings. That's insane. It's insane that people were around back then making cave art, hunting coyotes.
I guess they were bored.
Yeah, it's kind of, it's weird with these paintings because, we had a tour guide, so we asked him all these questions, and a lot of the questions are like, why did they do this? Well, for what purpose? What was the reasoning behind the ordering of the drawings, and et cetera, et cetera. But obviously there's no like pamphlet or written documentation to go with it. So all that we have and the researchers have and historians have to go off of is the painting. So they have to look at the paintings and infer, oh, they probably put it here because of like X reason or whatever, right? Anyway, so Snøhetta project, what were some of the stats on it so we know?
It was done in 2017.
Okay.
Which explains why it's, it looks pretty new still. I think the site is about over 500,000 square feet, but the building itself looks to be about 93,000 square feet, which is pretty big. It was done by Snøhetta, but they also work in close collaboration with a scenographer called Casson Mann, who helped it out, and they describe...
Wait, what's a scenographer?
Scenography, it's like kind of like stage design, kind of
like
you put kind of it's kind of an interior designer, but more on the user experience and type of thing. And they describe the project actually as an experimental storytelling based around wonder and mystery.
So what happened is that these caves were discovered, and then they were made open to the public, so everyone could, the actual caves during the 1940s or whatever, so the public could come in and see this history. But then obviously they ended up contaminating the cave with excess humidity, mildew, or whatever. So sometime after all of that happened, they closed down the caves to the public to preserve it. And they decided to create this museum and a recreation of the cave. So
a replica,
a facsimile of the cave. So the museum is interesting because it's not just like, here's a replica of the cave and then that's it, but there's a bit more to it. How should we go about discussing this building? I mean, I think the most enjoyable, I think this is the first Snøhetta project I've seen. No. Well, there's a museum of the 9/11 events down in Financial District. Never went inside of it. I just saw it from the outside. They also, I think, they did the planning of like Times Square or something weird.
Oh, like the repavement.
The repavements of that? Yeah. Which, okay, tangent. With Times Square, it's so chaotic. Like, what difference does that make to anyone? You could put anything out there, it'd be chaos. But what's interesting about this building is that, again, it's not just the cave arpeggiato. There's a whole sequences. The history of the caves are explained in a variety of ways and through a number of different spaces. So
well, maybe we can talk about it as, a procession through it.
Right. So let's say you're in the car, you're driving on these really windy French hillsides that make everyone car sick. And you're in this really small town with some really not a very attractive town,
Well, it was a rainy day, so it's not helping out.
But it's not a lot of money, let me put it that way.
It's a countryside.
Single story, right? And all of a sudden there's this like angled, jagged, concrete building that's semi-embedded into the landscape, right? That's there. It seems very out of place. It's like, wow, this is a nice museum by some decent architecture in the middle of nowhere is what it feels like. But what's weird about the building is that it presents itself like horizontally. Mm-hmm. So you enter like the face of it, the side of it in a way, and you kind of experience the building in that way most of the time. So the lobby is very long. It's shallow and wide is the way we could put it.
You enter from the side? I didn't get that impression. You mean you enter from the side of the lobby?
Well, no, there's like a hillside, right? This... And then there's the building that's coming from the hillside, but it doesn't project outward. It's like part of the hillside is what it feels like. Uh-huh. So you're entering the long face of the building. Do you get what I'm saying?
Yeah, but it's the front?
It's the front, but it also feels like the side.
Interesting.
You know what I mean? Because the lobby front is just like, basically it's a ribbon of concrete, and then the bottom is like storefronting, like a curtain wall, right? And it's just all glass. It's just all glass. So it's like you're entering just this wall of glass through,
like almost like a cut through the hill or something.
Yeah, kind of. Because it's not like you're entering a gateway that has a gate and a portal and a big thing. You're just entering just a wall of glass.
There is no front door there. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
What was interesting too is that, like you said, the way it sits in the landscape is very horizontal and half embedded within the hill it takes place in. Mm-hmm. The other interesting part is that they clearly separated where people park their car away from the building, mm-hmm. which, from the moment you park your car until you approach the building, you really get to see it all without trucks and cars and stuff in front of it, which I thought was really nice.
But what's a bit odd is that when you see it from a distance like that, your first instinct, at least mine, is that I want to walk along the length of the thing from the ground up to the roof because it slopes down to the ground and then back down, right? Which you can do, but that's not the way you enter the building. You enter it's very abrupt when you enter. Yeah. There's just a flat landscape, this kind of cut reveal thing, and then you walk through glass and now you're in the building. And where one would kind of think that the procession to get into the building that you would typically take would be more like experiencing the length of the building, right? Because that's what makes it really interesting is you have this really long building that slopes from the ground up and then back down.
But you could do both. It's just the most direct way to get to it is the straight shot.
So going space by space, getting to the lobby was okay. They had this dropped ceiling that was kind of a weird angled pattern. It had some very peculiar moments to me. And they had some perforations, which I think were for acoustics, but they had nothing to do with the geometries of anything else.
They looked a little too anecdotic, like there was not enough of them, or their presence was not particularly doing anything. Then you kind of wonder, like, was that a mistake, or they just try to be cute there and like do a little cutout?
It looked like a mistake.
It was a little odd.
Because the angled language is the language of the entire building. It's not curved. It's not orthogonal. It's angled, right? And it's kind of like an abstracted version of a cave, we could say, is the feeling, right? The heavy concrete and whatever. And then I don't know who did the furniture and like the shelving, the movable shelving and things of the lobby, but it was really bad.
It always amazes me, like the most beautiful museums, how crappy they're like gift shop furniture, or whatever it is. It's like an afterthought that someone random kind of crammed in the space, It's annoying.
The shelving they had for the gift shop, the gift shop was floating within the big lobby. It's just one big room, and there's separate furniture to distinguish one space from the next, so it's not walled off. But the shelving they used for the gift shop looked like it came from IKEA.
Yeah.
Like, what is this doing here? They must have not been in charge of that. And even the furniture, which was better because it was almost pebble looking, kind of angled pebble colors, earthy sort of tones, that fit the caves, sort of oranges, reds, and things. But they were kind of randomly dispersed. Like, it didn't fit the space. It was kind of like someone came in and was like, where do we put this? We have 3 couches. Where do we put them?
Against the wall.
Against the wall. There's some space between the 2 entries. Well, put a couch there. More sitting? No, just one couch by itself. It's fine. It's really, really bizarre.
Yeah.
But Snøhetta took seized some opportunities to do some cool material stuff. Like the concrete had a nice pattern, texture kind of embedded with it, again, to kind of mimic the cave sediments and things.
Yeah. It gives the idea of the time, the layers of the earth, and the time going by. That was pretty neat. Even the glass facade, it was like big panes of glass, so you could actually look outside without feeling like you had a glass facade in between. It was really open and fluid, which was really nice.
And we got lucky because I guess typically the tours that they give are like 30 people large, which I cannot imagine being part of a tour group of 3 people. And it was just the 4 of us. So we got one tour guide for the 4 of us. And what's interesting is, I think the most interesting part of the entire experience had little to do with the actual architecture or the building itself, like the concrete, whatever. It wasn't that. It was the fact that the museum experience was really all encompassing. So you had you had the replicas, you had a movie theater thing, you had the audio set that you wore, you had projections, like every possible way you could think of conveying information about a piece of history, in this case a cave, and paintings. They did it. So you got to understand the work and the content from all these different angles.
And that's why I think their description of, an experimental storytelling is pretty accurate, because they really try to use different media to captivate different senses at different times throughout the museum.
Yeah.
And tell the same story from multiple angles in multiple different ways, which I thought was pretty nice. It's not just facts on the wall that you have to look, or like stupid movie documentary that you have to watch. It was even the little short movie that we watched before we entered the replica, I thought was pretty well done. Or you have like sound effects where they show like the transformation of the area over time, from like the ice era until now, and the time they discovered and all that.
Because I think with any piece of, let's call it art, let's say, anything that's displayed in a gallery, it's the object itself, but there's always the reason why this thing is important, because it causes people to think differently, and so there's the contemplation aspect around this thing. For you to fully understand the context within which this thing was created and how it changed thinking and how et cetera. And sometimes that's hard to convey when it's just the thing on the wall with a tiny description in, like 6-point font next to it.
Yeah. What was key is that they're really, ask for your participation as a person going through.
Right.
It is a procession, because there is a beginning and an end and things you go through. There is an order to things. But you also actively have to participate, otherwise you're going to miss a lot of it.
So the tour begins with this one guy, sort of like the Guggenheim, in that you take an elevator and you go up to the top and then you work your way down, which was kind of interesting. Which I get, but I don't know. For some reason, if you have this hillside that the building is basically built underneath, is what it feels like, you would think that more time would be spent like walking along that edge of the building in some way, and then circulating down or walking up that way. And it was a bit odd because you take this elevator, you pop up, right? So you've pierced through the hillside / building / cave, whatever you want to call it. And you're kind of in a place that's a little bit awkward. That initial space was not the most, I don't know. There's something, it's not grand is not the right word, but there wasn't enough payoff when you first got off there, it felt like. It was awkwardly positioned. Anyway, so you go up there, then the guy does some I don't speak French or understand French, so he does some talking in French.
And I did like translation during the whole visit.
And then you proceed walking down, and then you end up kind of behind the building, which is kind of strange.
So the thing he explained before we even got up to the viewpoint was that the museum was thought, and the sequence of rooms were thoughts going from an alternating between the light and shadow, basically, right? So you would go from one bright space to a dark one, and you keep going until the end of the museum. So like, okay, that sounds pretty cool. So when we went up, we were in this glass elevator. There was a glass box, basically. So that was really nice because you don't feel the weight, you don't feel the enclosure, you just feel the lift to the rooftop, which was pretty cool. And then we walked around from the roof down to the first room. And like you said, you kind of meander toward the back of the building. You almost felt like a back entry or like a space where only the staff would go in a way.
Yeah.
But it was nicely done. Like, there was like a nice stone wall that was detailed. There was some sound effect coming from the landscaping nearby.
Yeah.
Which kind of creeped me out at first. I was like, who's there? What's that?
Because the story is that this guy and his dog, he's going for a walk in the forest or whatever, and that's how they came across the cave. So behind the building is this kind of forest area, and they embedded speakers. So you hear like a fake dog barking and a Frenchman going like, "Ooh, my chien," right? Where's my dog? Chien.
Où est mon chien?
Yeah, it's close. It's pretty close.
I'm missing half of the words.
Yeah, that backspace was nice, but I think it felt too much like a backspace still.
Yeah.
Even with the detailing they did, it still felt like you were in a loading dock, a really narrow loading dock. Because the thing is, like, when you next enter the building, like, I think they at Snøhetta attempted to do an interesting sequences of spaces, and they thought it out. So it wasn't a typical gallery. So that back area, which is very long and angled, let's say you accept it as being cool and interesting. But then equally important is the transition from that to inside, meaning the door to get inside. And the door to get inside struck me as being very back of house, like janitor closet door, even though it wasn't that, there was some custom concrete work and whatever, but it just felt like, all right, I guess we ended up here, and it's kind of like you're in an alley and you're at the end of the alley and there's no other door but that one. So it's like, I guess I'll go through this one. I have no other option is what it felt like. And in that way, it didn't feel very intentional. But actually, now that you tell me it was light, dark, that makes sense. I don't think I knew that when I was going through it. Very harsh.
I told you that. I did a translation.
Oh, yeah, that's right. I remember now. It's cool, but... so anyway, so you're outside in the back, like we were talking, then you go through inside, and that's when they have the film that you were describing, right? Where it's like the film is the entire wall. It takes up the entire wall. It's a projection, I think. And you basically... It feels like you're watching a window to the outside, and then they go from current day to backwards. Is that it?
No, I think it was the opposite.
From backwards to forwards. So they show you a landscape from like 20,000 years ago or something, and they zoom forward, which I've seen that before in various museums and things like that. It can be very effective, but they kind of jumped too much. It was like 20,000 years ago. It's all ice, and there's like, I don't know, ice bison or whatever the fuck, and then zoom forward, and then there's a greenery, and there's eagles and stuff, and then a deer walks by, and so they go from that to that. 1940. Here's a guy walking around with pantalones and his dog. I'm like, all right, what happened to the other hundreds of years of human civilization?
Nothing to declare. Nothing happened in that part of France.
Where were the cave people that did the paintings? They must have been walking around. Like, what did they look like? You know what I mean? It was kind of a radical shift. But that space was kind of underwhelming, which, like, it's basically a small room with carpet. And then what happens after that space? I don't even remember. The cave.
Then we probably can back out and back in. And then there was a glass sliding door where you actually step in the replica.
Ah, here we go. The jewels, the center. Right. So what did you think of the replica?
I thought it looked pretty legit.
Really?
I was like, Actually, it made me wonder, because I was like, well, that looks pretty good. And it makes you wonder why are people judging replicas or faux like a bad thing? I was like, well, in that case, for example, it is a good thing, right? Because you're not deteriorating the existing, the real one, right? But also, not knowing the real one, if I didn't know it was a replica, I could have believed it. And then what?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
What makes the replica and the original better or bad? And I guess it's the idea of truth and authenticity and history and value over time and all those things. But
wait, so are you talking about like specifically architectural styles, like copying an architectural style, or just okay? So like, are you thinking as extreme as like the fake Eiffel Tower in Las Vegas, or
no? That's a bad version of the existing one, right? But like if you say a replica, a faux of the Mona Lisa,
mm-hmm.
right? If someone made an exact copy that looks exactly like the Mona Lisa, that's not a real one, but it's look as good as the real one, then why is the fake one bad?
I think
because
actually,
it was copied from an original version.
Well, I think people pay a lot of money to have really good replicas, right?
Well, in that particular instance, there is the idea of value, right? Like something that's true versus something that's fake, costs more or less. But if you just look at the design aspect of it, then you forget like money. That's as good.
Well, I think it's an interesting question. When it's artwork, it's different. I mean, then you get to issues of like mass production. So if something is designed to be mass produced, it's not like you assign value to the first one that was produced off the line, the factory line, right? Makes no difference really. Even if it has a serial stamp of 00001, like who cares? It's the same as all the others. So I suppose when it's meant to be a one-off, just because of that, it has more value because when it's an original. But there seems to also be a distinction between objects that are easily transferable, like you can pick them up and move them, like artwork, say, painting, for example, versus site-specific things like architecture. It seems like in architecture or large art installations, if you move it, then it's like, no. You can't move it. Like it was meant to be in this place. Maybe, or even if it wasn't designed with the site environment and the context in mind, it's still, just because it was there initially, it's like somehow the context is really important, right? I guess that's the distinction.
I'm not sure, but that, made me question things. But yeah, I thought I've never been inside of a painted cave. I've been inside caves, but with not paintings on them. And I've seen those kinds of paintings in books and learned that in school and, like all of that stuff. So actually seeing a very good replica of the most famous one was pretty cool. It was really, really interesting. And, it really makes you question a lot of things.
But we're like what?
Like, yeah, what the heck were those people doing 20,000 years ago? And what is the meaning of all this? And if this guy was able to do that 20,000 years ago, then the guy who's doing graffiti in the corner of the street, he's like, a -5 year art school student. Like, this is really like you're using spray paint and you can't even do a good job. That guy used like little bamboo sticks and like powder pigment and did like amazing shit, Yeah,
that's definitely true. Yeah.
So that was really incredible.
Because the cave paintings, I think maybe some people, when they think of cave paintings, they jump
like
to like stick figures and stuff
yeah.
like that, or I was going to say turkeys, but it's in school. Like when you for Thanksgiving in the United States, you draw a turkey, use your hand, or whatever that kind of thing. But these were really sophisticated. I mean, some of them were more rudimentary, but I mean, there's full on perspective, shade shattering sizes, and they actually used the cave to inform where painting should be located and how they should be oriented and what sequences.
Well, that and using the three-dimensionality of the walls to give, the impression of the belly of the horse or things like that was really fascinating.
Yeah, sophisticated period, not sophisticated for 20,000 years ago or sophisticated for, non-developed humans, like sophisticated period. And it is, you're right. It's like you have students who ever complaining about work, and it's like, okay, look, this was done 20,000 years. Granted, these cave people, what are they called? Lascauians? I don't know. The Lascaux?
Cro-Magnon.
Cro-Magnon?
Cro-Magnon.
Oh, Cro-Magnons. Okay, so these crow people, right? They probably spent like years doing this, but still.
Well, the thing is, they don't even know if it was one guy or like thousands of guys, if they were all trained by the same teacher, if they all came up with this. They have no idea.
No idea. It could have been all women, for all you know, sexist.
Could have been animals
kind of
painting.
Assuming it's guys, it's a little bit rude, I think. This day and age, to be more aware of these issues. Thank you very much.
Well, what did you think of that cave?
I was going to ask you, like, were you able to enjoy it, or in your mind, every 5 to 10 seconds were you thinking, but this is a replica?
I kept thinking, damn, this is a replica. It looks pretty good.
I couldn't get over the fact that it was a replica.
Really?
Yeah. I had to really, really force myself to try and not think about it. Otherwise, I'm like, yeah, but is it really like this? I'm suspicious. I don't trust it. Like, so what happened was they did a digital scan. They used the best technology of that time. But remember that the scanning didn't happen in 2019. It happened in 2000 whatever. So they digitally scanned it, and then they recreated the shell, the physical canvas, we could say. And they had a bunch of artists basically look at laptops and then take paintbrushes or use the same tools that they use, and then recreate it by looking at the laptop. And they just went inch by inch. So there's a lot of selling by the museum and the organizations that, like, this is a really good replica. This is like state of the art. Like every square millimeter is accounted for. And yet for me, I'm like, nah, but I don't know.
Well, you never know, because the real one is closed.
That's why I don't believe it.
No, I thought it was pretty good. I mean, you have to be okay with the fact it's a replica, but I don't know. I had a hard time like enjoying it just because we were with my parents and they kept asking questions, and my mom kept wanting to try and take pictures.
And the first thing the guy says explicitly, you cannot take any pictures.
And my dad is asking questions, so the guide is answering my dad, and she's like, "Oh, I'm going to take a picture. Oh, no, I'm going to take a picture." I'm like, "No, you cannot take a picture." The guy said no, and he's right there too. He's gonna hear the click.
There's only four of us. There's only four of us.
What are you thinking?
And we were the only ones in the entire cave, and the cave is pretty big. So yeah, there's no hiding. And also, your mom always uses the flash. Like, what was she thinking was gonna happen?
I don't know.
Like, what was that? I don't know.
I don't know. But the art on the wall itself was truly amazing. Like you said, using the three-dimensionality of the wall of the cave, the location, it seemed like there was some kind of order of where things were represented or where they were looking at. The colors that were used, or even the superposition of drawings within drawings, was really intricate.
They superimpose things to convey movement, like what do you call it? A diaporama?
Diaporama?
Is that what it is?
No. Yeah, I forgot.
Whatever. So like a horse has multiple heads because each head is showing its position in different movement. Right.
That's what they're thinking. Right. Yeah.
And they even located...
And he was saying that if you imagine that these people did that with the flame of a candle, basically, with the oscillation of the light, you could almost imagine that, the horse could have been moving on the wall.
Right.
Which
I didn't get.
Let's try now. Don't you have a candle on you right now?
How does that work though? Because it flickers, you...
Because it flickers, and the light flickers, and the images are... You have to use your imagination. I mean...
I think they were smoking something.
Yeah, probably.
When the light's turned on, it highlights everything. It's not like because it's flickering, you only highlight the next frame of movement.
Nobody could give the idea that things are moving around you.
Yeah, maybe if you're drugged. But the other thing too is they located different animals in different spaces. So I forget, but let's say the lion or the tiger or whatever beast that was considered the most fierce and they were probably most afraid of, they located way in the back in an area of the cave that was so tight that you couldn't access, right, unless you're like a really skinny a Cro-Magnon person or whatever. So everything was located with like specific intent. The thing that I didn't like about the interior cave is that they had to alter the replica to allow people to fit through, and for safety reasons. Like sometimes the cave dropped down too low, so they had to raise the ceiling. Sometimes they had to widen the path because the path was too narrow, or they had to add a concrete flooring because, you know, cave flooring is probably not safe to walk on. And that happened enough in the entire cave that it became an issue for me, because again, most people don't think this, but I do. I think what they should have done is they should have been very clear what parts of the caves were distorted to fit people and for, you know, building code reasons and stuff like this, and not make it look like part of the cave. So in other words, the walking path specifically, what I don't want to see is the concrete floor be poured directly on top of the cave. So it looks so the fake cave wall comes down and hits the concrete like it's a butt joint. What I'd rather see is the full cave in section 360 from the floor all the way to the ceiling, complete as it was, and then you float a path going down the middle, right? To me, this is a much clearer understanding of what the actual cave was and a better experience.
Yeah,
absolutely.
I agree. Then you're kind of on the verge of being like a theme park, you know, kind
That's
of like
problem.
Molded theme park
when everything's melded together.
Yeah.
Because I've been to Disneyland so many times, when I look down and I see it's the same theme park, you know, concrete flooring, and it's meeting the wall that's made to look like a cave, I know it's all fake.
Yeah.
You know, and if they have to stretch a section for clearance, right? Like the actual cave was only 4'5", and then you raise it up to 8 feet or whatever, you could do that. But again, I think there should have been something to show where that cut happens. Because at least for me now, I'm looking at the wall going, all right, so was this painting that's here in this area that's stretched, how did that actually work in real life?
I think that would have helped too with, you know, the railing the handrail that they had running around. That was a little too, I'm waiting in line at Walt Disney to go on my ride.
Yeah.
And I think, like you said, if you had more of that shell and you were kind of like a floating passenger through it, it would have been a little better.
I mean, if you're really trying to recreate the original and you want people to observe it like they saw the original, then you want to recreate the original and then then your interventions become very light, right? And they did that at some points. I don't know why they changed from concrete flooring to metal. It's like a grill that you were walking on for a bit, and they did that. And even then it was more effective, because then the grill was, maybe they had some kind of caulking or something between the grill and the side, but even then the distinction between those two, you know, the floor and the wall was better. So it felt like you're actually walking through something, and the part that you're inhabiting, it was designed just for you.
Well, that portion of the cave was much on the same elevation throughout, right? The first half of the cave, kind of enter from the top and meander down. So, you know, it might have been why. I don't know.
It was impressive. It was impressive, though. And what else is going on? What else happened inside the cave? I can't imagine being in that space with 30 people, though. It was super echoey. It's the cave.
It was echoey. I think it was kind of hot, and it was nice to have a guide to go through, you know, who could like point things and tell you basically where to look and what to look for. In the same time, I almost wish I had like maybe 5 minutes to myself where I could just like walk without stopping every 2 meters and hear something. You know, I like having guides, but I also like having my own time to do my own thing. I'm kind of a rebellious person.
Right.
So that was the only thing, you know.
Yeah. I mean, even the entrances and exits, you know, obviously they have to put in a door, and when you entered the cave, initially it was through a tiny hole at the top, right, that led to the surface. So the door and all that area, you know, is new. And even then, if I recall correctly, they try to like merge the door with the cave. I don't know. I'm just not a fan of that, because then it just makes it look much more fake. It's like, what are we doing?
Yeah, there was a little.
Just punch a hole in it.
Yeah,
and the hole is a hole. Let the hole be the hole. And then immediately after the cave, you enter this super bright outdoor space, which I get the theme is like dark light, but
the transition was so abrupt.
It's kind of aggressive. It's like unnecessary.
At the end of the visit, I think all of the four of us felt like super car sick. And I think it was because because of the back and forth with the super bright, super dark, and your eyes not adjusting, also probably being hungry a little bit. Like all of that combined was a little overwhelming.
But I don't understand why that would be the theme of this. In a cave, you're not going light, dark, like dark.
Well, you're going in the cave, it's dark. You're going out of the cave, it's bright.
Yeah, but who's going like in, out, in, out, in, out?
I don't know. Maybe he forgot his pigment outside, went back out, went back in for a bite, went back out. Who knows? No, I thought that was interesting, but especially if the idea is coming inside a cave and outside of a cave, the light slowly progresses in the dark space, right? It's not like a switch. It's not you turn it on, you turn it off. So they could have make that transition a little more subtle.
Subtle. I mean, I part of me feels like the aggressive or more abrupt transition from dark to light, it could be a valid, strategy or a valid idea, right? Which I'm not completely sold on, but it could be. But it's kind of too simple in a way. It's like, oh, how do we do this? Okay, well, we have a dark space and there's one door. You jump out and you're in the light. All right, now we've created the dark light scenario. It's a little bit, you could do something a little more finesse than that.
Yeah.
Especially, again, because all the doorways and those thresholds, which are super important in this kind of project, were not really anything special. The door itself, which you could say should not be critiqued because it probably has to meet standard codes or whatever. But even everything around the door, it just wasn't really, it just felt like a door. And maybe because of the number of times that transition happened, at some point I kind of felt like, am I just being fucked with? You know what I mean? Like, why do I have to go through this painful experience, for the 3 or 4 times? Doesn't seem like I didn't gain anything from it as a...
Well, it almost made me feel like we needed the guide because it wasn't clear what door we were supposed to use.
Yeah.
It's just kind of like, okay. Also, I was kind of getting annoyed with him. It was really nice, and he pulled off with my parents, so I have to say, like, he did a good job. But I kept asking questions that were legitimate questions, and instead of telling me he did not know the answer, he was answering by saying something that was not really related to what I asked.
Oh.
And I'm like, okay, well, no, that's not helpful. No,
that is the worst.
If you don't know, just tell me you don't know. That's fine. I'm not expecting you to know everything. Like, it's okay. But why are you talking to me about this? It's not what I ask.
That is I don't know why that exists as a human trait, but it's so annoying. You send an email to someone. I have these 3 questions. They write back answering one question. What the fuck?
Yeah.
What the fuck? Or you're talking to someone and then you ask them a question, the clarification. And they just go on a tangent. I'm thinking of someone specific, but I want to name them. And they go on a tangent and you're like, that's not what the fuck I'm asking. And they do it all the time. And they think it's a way to misdirect the conversation. I
felt like he was giving me another information kind of to apologize and compensate that he did not have the right answer for me. So he was slipping in another piece of knowledge just so I was feeling satisfied. And I'm like, you can give me like sourdough bread. If I ask for sweet bread, I'm still going to be expecting sweet bread.
No, I can't stand it.
So.
It's annoying. And I don't know, anyone who has their head on straight, they know it's just like, it's bullshit. It's total bullshit. Like when people are talking about their work or whatever, like, so why did you do this? Well, over here, I have a series of glass doors. That has nothing to do with my question. Yeah. And then it moves on. Like, fuck. Who the fuck has taught you in the past?
Anyway.
All right. So, but after the cave, and you go to this next outdoor space, the really bright outdoor one, bright by contrast, that space I did not understand. What's interesting about the project is
the bright space?
Yeah, the courtyard with the water fountain.
I'm not sure if we were supposed to hang out there for a while.
That's what I'm saying. Not clear. What's weird about the project is it's very linear, right? So it's layers, let's say, right? The front layer is the lobby, then the next layer is an indoor space, then outdoor space, and the cave, etc., and then the back space. There's these layers. And the way you kind of move through the project is not a zigzag through the layers. You don't go up the first layer, then down the second, then up the third, then down the fourth. You kind of cut across, right? So I mean, you go inside one, you explore it, and you go on to the next. And so you're cutting, crossways against the layers. Do you know what I mean? I'm trying to figure out how to explain this to people listening.
The weird thing with doing that too is that, thinking about it now, when you're going through the museum and the whole parkour thing, you actually don't know where you are in the building.
Yeah.
Like, I actually have no idea in plan what the building looks like.
Yeah.
That's weird.
It's weird, and I'm not a huge fan of that. I mean, you could easily argue that a building's exterior does not have to communicate its interior. That's totally true. But I don't know, in a project like this that presents itself so clearly from the outside, I found it a bit odd that the overall circulation was kind of like I described it, and that you get really lost. I don't know. For a highly curated procession, you think that procession would be clearer.
And thinking about that bright space we ended after going through the replica, I'm thinking if I wanted to go back to that courtyard, I don't even know how I would go back there without going back through the door I just went through. Because you can't see that courtyard from anywhere else.
Yeah.
The whole indoor and outdoor and how does the space flows from one to the next was very fragmented. It's really disturbing.
I think somehow these different slivers of space could have been like positioned. Oh, I'd love to see a floor plan of this thing. Could be positioned more like offset, so the transition between them wasn't so much like bink, you're in the next one, bink, you're in the next one. But there's some kind of, again, it goes back to the idea of an abrupt transition from light to dark, which I just think, I don't know, there could have been. Let me see if I can find a floor plan. Yeah, so we just found the floor plan. It's a pretty complicated floor plan. We don't know the siding conditions, so they might not have any other option, but I can, now looking at the floor plan, now I know why it was so confusing. Interesting. Very interesting. Well, the critique still stands from a first person's perspective. Yeah, but that courtyard space, when we arrived there, I didn't understand what it was for.
I don't know, and I think there was other guys that were like taking their break there or something, and I was like, are we going through like the lunchroom break?
It was another space that felt like the back of house, right? And in part because they used concrete for everything, and it wasn't a warm colored tone. It was very gray and cold, and maybe it also had to do with the weather, but it's gray and cold, so it just felt like you're in the back wall of a factory, kind of.
I wonder if the experience would have been different with a 30 people group. You know, if we felt like that because we were like just a few individuals.
I don't know. I mean, this courtyard space that we're describing was, again, very long and narrow and angled, and there's a very sleek kind of water feature at one end and some little green stuff, but basically giant concrete walls that are 20 feet high. They're tall. So you're in a cavern, kind of, you're in a split. You're in like the earth that's been split, but because it's concrete and very flat, it just feels like you're between two sides of a giant building.
Construction site.
You're in a construction pit, kind of. It doesn't feel cave-like or warm, which is one thing I kept wondering is like, should they have used a stone or something that was warmer than the concrete they went with? Because it was very cold. And I get that. It's a funny thing when you have a cave project and you're going to kind of not mimic, but quote the cave feeling or geometries or shape, right? By doing angled sort of like pseudo cave stuff. Like, to me, it's a very fuzzy line between just mimicking it directly versus it becoming something new, or if it's too abstracted and too different, then does it cease to become meaningful in the way it's trying to be, which is quoting the cave vernacular or cave sensation or cave whatever, cave essence. And to me, the coldness of the concrete and the angles, it was a little like, if it was warmer, you wouldn't feel like you're the back of house. Yeah,
but it would have probably felt a little too much, like, oh, they're trying to be
too
cave-like.
Much. That's what I'm saying. It's an interesting threshold, right? It's an interesting threshold.
The next space that we went into after this was more like a museum, like exhibition room, and
big room.
It was pretty interesting and extremely experimental in a way, right? They kind of isolated several elements of the cave and use technology to convey the meaning of it. So one was, the mode of the ceiling of one part of the cave that was suspended from the ceiling, and using a blue light, a purple light, you could see like all of the other sketches and lines that they've done before they actually trace the real one.
But we didn't have access to the black light. Only the curator did. Only the what do you call it? Tour guide did. And he kind of waved around, like, "Oh yeah, look, there's other stuff that you can't see." Then he left. It's like, all right, can we have that light so we can see the stuff again, or no?
I think the light was going on. There was a little audio set you were using with an iPad, and whenever you were approaching one of those elements, the audio would automatically kick on.
Yep.
And you would hear, the whole story about it. And some of them, it was also launching the whole light display. Like they were highlighting several parts of the paintings on the wall and showing different things, which was really, really well done.
Yeah, this room we spent almost as much time, if not more time, than in the replica itself, because there was so many different pieces to see. And basically, it's a room of suspended portions of the replica. It's a second replica, and they've suspended portions, so you get to kind of walk around it and see the structure of the shell itself. And all the galleries and tour guides have been on that utilize headsets and whatever, they never work. But this one worked pretty well, and it was a very well thought out display and audio and the pairing of the two and everything.
I really felt like I was a kid in that room.
Yeah.
I was a kid learning about history from long time ago.
What
in a fun way.
My first thought when I went into that space was that it looked like an architectural installation. It looked like a fifth-year thesis architectural installation.
Design
installation. A show. Yeah, it did. It had that feeling about it. It really it was clear okay, architects were behind this. I don't know what makes me say that, but it really felt that way. But what did you think about how the portions of the replica were suspended, the displaying of them?
I thought it was pretty intense.
We'll post pictures online, and you can always obviously just Google it. So it's one big room and a flat ceiling, and the ceiling has these angled cutout shapes, right? And there's a lot of light coming down. I don't know if they're skylights or fake lights or what, but a ton of light coming down from those. Within those shapes, within those kind of skylight cutouts, there are a bunch of steel cable, they're rods that are coming down, and those are suspending a floating section of the replica. And there's a bunch of these all over, right? So when you walk around, which is really cool because that means all these things are floating, which is a magical, so the floor is undisturbed. But so that in itself is a visually very appealing thing. So when I first entered the space, I'm like, this is freaking awesome. This is cool. But then I started to think, I'm not so sure if I like these angled skylights with the tension poles coming down, because the light's so bright that it lights up the poles.
It makes it look like stalactites.
Stalactites?
The eyes.
Yeah, okay, yeah. But don't you think that it's maybe distracting from the object itself?
It is.
It starts to compete with the artwork, as we're calling it.
It is.
It's cool, but is it necessary? And why is it highlighting itself? It's almost like it's almost trying really hard to show itself as a feature when that's not what we're supposed to be looking at, is my point.
It reminds me of a Gary move.
Gary move? No way.
Showing the support of things. Maybe it's the fact that they were black too. If they were painted white, they would have been a little more discreet in the space.
I don't think so. No way. White would have stood out even more. Because the cave portions are lit up really bright, but then right above it, you have this really bright skylight that looks, again, really, really cool. But I don't know. It seems distracting to me because there's these tension poles. There's so many of them. Like the piece we're looking at now, there's almost 100 or something. A lot. It's not like tiny cables.
But the thing is, to suspend it, you would have needed some kind of structure to support that, right? It looks like it's probably heavy. That's why they need so many. Then the question is, maybe they didn't need to put skylight on top to highlight them. In the same time, the skylight is probably helping the rod to kind of fade away. You know.
I mean, I get it's a nicer detail than saying this thing goes straight up into the ceiling. It's always a weird connection moment. But I'm just saying that one critique would be that it's more distracting than it is anything else.
Yeah.
You know. And then after this, you enter another... Yeah, every time we ended up in a space outside of the replica itself, the cave, because when we get to the cave, you know it's the cave, and you're like, all right, we're here. But all the other spaces, whenever we arrived, my first thought was, I don't know where we are or what we're supposed to be doing. Exactly.
Well, the main corridor of that building, because it was such a quiet day, you really just saw staff from the museum all around. So I was like, is this the end? Is there more to it? And I think they actually saw that we were confused because they were like, oh, there is a movie that's about to start. I can open the room if you guys want to go in and watch it. Like, oh, okay, interesting. I would have never known there was a movie that's about to be watched. It's a little unclear.
Well, the thing is, you have a tour guide and he takes you from one space to the next, to the next, to the next. And then you get dropped off in this long hallway and you're like, am I supposed to walk down that hallway? Even if there was a bunch of people and they were walking around that you would know to follow them. But even then there would be a moment of hesitation like, wait a second. He left us, so are we done now?
Yeah, it was kind of unclear.
And this space is nice. Architecture, whatever. Angled, concrete, skylight out at the top, narrow, very tall. You can probably imagine what it's like. We've kind of seen it or designed it. We've seen it. It's another one where, in some ways, it's not a hallway. It's not just a hallway because the architecture is so fantastic, we could say, or out of the ordinary. That's not just the typical hallway. It's probably meant to feel a certain way, cavern-like or cave-like or earth-like or whatever, right? But the way the program is organized, it's a fucking hallway. It's a hallway with basically rooms next to it. And you go from one room and then you jump out of that room. You walk a few feet down the hallway and go into the next room on the same side. And then you jump out of that room, walk down the hallway to the next space. And this is where, again, I feel like the ordering, when you have this much square footage, I don't know, I feel like the ordering of the spaces and the sequences could have been a little more lyrical than just space, go out into the hallway, walk down, next space. It felt very much like walking down, hallway in a house.
It's kind of strange because you go from, going up the building, down the building, around, inside, outside, through the cave, under the cave, above, all of this. Like, it's such a three-dimensional flow. And then once you're out of that room with the suspended stuff from the ceiling, you're kind of like sadly back to the real world and reality and doors and corridors and straight shots,
in the space that we're talking about?
Yeah, the other rooms that they had after this one were actually all very, very interesting. And I don't know why they had such a boring way to distribute them when they could have really, maybe they could have made it in a way that you had to go through each of them to get out. Kind of keep that narrative going on.
Yeah.
They had one room that had some screens and some kind of artwork on the two walls and the ceilings. That was pretty cool. They had a little nook that had the VR sets, and they had a little projection room with 3D goggles you put on, and you lay on a couch and you watch the ceiling of the room being projected.
Mm-hmm.
But all of the spaces were so, again, split
discrete.
and discrete and separated from everything else that you could have walked straight down and exit the museum and completely missed those three rooms where, everything you experienced before that was deliberately scheduled and sequenced in a way you could not miss it. So it seemed like there was some kind of rupture in the narrative of the user experience there, which wasn't clear why. Maybe yes, that's at the point where the guide leaves you and you're kind of on your own. But does that mean that it has to be so boring and normative? I don't know.
No, I agree with that entirely. I think something that's a nice moment in a lot of galleries and museums is when you're going through it. And you know, museums, big ones are disorienting anyway, because you're so focused on the work that a lot of times you end up somewhere like, how the fuck did I get here? I don't even know, because you're not paying attention. But there are moments where you can look back and see where you came from. Like there's a specific cutout in the MoMA in New York where there's a staircase going through it. So, but there are these spaces where you're there, and it's a space itself, but also there's a window, an actual window, or just a way to view or whatever, where you look back and where you came from. And there's some kind of greater understanding of the architecture in the museum itself, but maybe even understanding of the artwork that happens because of that. And in this one, it was a little disturbing in that you were handheld all the way, and you could never really reflect back on what just happened because you didn't even know where you were. And when you get to the third space, you have no idea where the previous one was, and you couldn't see it. And I kind of wonder if there's a way for them to address that or have more overlapping of spaces or something. I'm not sure.
And even to exit, like it wasn't clear where the exit was. Were you supposed to give your headset back?
Yeah.
They could have used either some kind of signage or some more encouraging way for people to know what they were supposed to do. It's kind of weird.
I will say though, so talking about the individual rooms, the VR set was awesome.
I had to piss. I had to piss. I had to eat a. No, you're gonna cut that off. I had to eat a piece of ginger, like an actual piece of like ginger root.
Right.
I was.
What the fuck you carrying ginger root for?
I carried ginger root in my purse the entire trip because the roads are too windy.
But and also because of the wizards, right?
The wizards? No. But yeah, I think after the guide dropped us, I was like, oh, my dad and I were like, oh, I feel so dizzy. And then, oh no, there is more. One of the guys was like, oh, there is a VR room. You should check it out. There is movies. You should check it out. Oh my God, the VR room, put the headset on. I was like, oh no, this is terrible. It was cool, but...
I don't know how you get dizzy with that.
Are you kidding me?
Well, you've played like Mario Kart in video games, the same thing.
But I'm not in Mario Kart.
Yeah,
I'm watching Mario
even
Kart.
Better inside.
No, it was so disorienting. It was like, you're barely moving your head and the thing is moving. I was like, oh no.
And then they have a movie theater space, and I liked that because it wasn't a typical one. They had really low kind of couches, and the couches were angled further back, so you leaned further back depending on how close they were to the screen. So the couches in the back were like more upright, and the ones in the front were over like 30 degrees or 20 degrees. Great. And the film itself, we wore 3D glasses, and it was like space, time. What is the meaning of life? And like, oh, fuck, we're going deep. Flipping through the galaxy. It was nuts. And then we leave, and the cafe was pretty good. Good in that the food they served was not too expensive, and it was good food.
Not too expensive. It could have been cheaper.
Could have been cheaper. It was good food, though.
You can tell that they're definitely trying to pay off that museum.
Yeah.
Yeah, it wasn't bad. But, architecturally, it could have been better in many, many ways. But for such a small town, in such countryside of France, I think it's kind of a big deal that something like that was done. And it makes me kind of happy that also they didn't do like a boring, straightforward museum that you've seen a zillion times, right? They tried to do something different. It's not perfect, but, they really try to do something different and try to do something that is tied and appropriate to what they are displaying. Yeah. Which I think was really nice.
So what was the, greatest strength or highlight of it for you?
Probably the replica.
The replica? Yeah. Yeah, for me, it was just seeing one subject matter, one thing over and over in radically different ways. That really afforded different insights. Critique, biggest flaws.
I think the bright and dark was just it wasn't done well enough. I think the concept was interesting, but it wasn't done well enough.
Yeah, not really finessed, right? Yeah, that would be up there for me. I think the overall sequencing or transitions of it, like there's a lot of really great moments, but they weren't stitched together in a really tight way. it was a little bit sloppy in those kinds of areas.
And especially if the dark and bright is the concept that is presented to you as a visitor when you step in. And we have to remember that we went on a cloudy day in March, right? This region of France gets really hot during the summer with a sun that's really bright. So I cannot even imagine what it must be like, when you go during the summertime.
Right.
It's where I'd be like, "Shpah!" Somebody's just flashing a light at your face,
Yeah, and moves like that are difficult because they border on gimmicky. I have no problem with it. I mean, that's there's nothing really terrible, but it borders gimmicky, and it needs to be worked enough for it to I don't know, just be more refined in order for it to be successful.
Well, especially when the architecture firm who does it is not like the little local architect, right? It's big as Snøhetta. Well,
I don't. Again, I've never been inside of a Snøhetta project outside of this one, and their work I know all right. I don't know super well. It's kind of what I expected in a way. I would say
I was expecting better, to be honest.
The style of architecture was to be expected. Like all their stuff kind of looks like this. It's all kind of landscapey, whatever things. And the coldness and the angles, again, falls right into their category. That's what they do. So you have a lot of moments that were cool and interesting and seemed to work from the point of view of an architect, but the organization of it seemed to be a bit off to me. You know what I mean? Like there's architectural cool things, but altogether it's
I was expecting more finesse, and I don't know their build work as I've experienced them that much or well, so maybe the idea that I have of their project is not actually the reality of it. But from other projects I've seen of theirs, I feel like oftentimes I appreciate their work because it seems like they have a very true and honest and sensible way to respond to a project and a program and materiality and details. But for this one, I felt like they're kind of like the low level of their potential. Like I know they're able to do certain things, and I feel like for this one, they didn't push the bar that much.
Next time we're in New York, we'll have to see a number of things, including the Heatherwick Beehive trash can, and also the Snøhetta 9/11 museum, because I've heard good things about it, and that's another museum of things. Should figure that out. All right, I got nothing else to say really this one.
This building actually was one of the 12 influential buildings in 2017,
according to
in the Architectural Digest.
Really?
Yeah. I think I would be curious to find out when they started working on that project, because I think I remember hearing about it when I was still living in France. And because it's part of the UNESCO heritage site, it's a very protected area, and it's a small town. And it's a big subject.
On Snøhetta's website, they have from 2012 to 2016 completion, but the whole Lascaux cave art stuff could have started, well before that. The discussions and whatever planning and things.
Yeah.
But if you're ever, for some reason, in the middle of nowhere in the southwest-ish of France, you should look this up and take a short drive to check it out. It is worth it.
Yeah.
Right? Oh.
It's worth it also just to learn about the cave there.
Oh, yeah,
to be honest, you know, that like if you just go for the building, it might not be worth it. But if you go for actually learning about the history of that area, it's definitely interesting to go.
Thanks everyone for listening to this week's episode of the Midnight Charette. And we are on iTunes, Spotify, and of course YouTube. And we have our own website where we have all of our previous episodes. Please leave a review on iTunes if you can, because apparently those reviews actually matter and mean something. So if you like what we're doing and you want to support us, then that's the best way to show your support, and it would be super appreciated. If you have any comments, questions, or you have topics that we should talk about or buildings to review that we can get to easily, then send us an email. Of course, reach out on any of the social medias. We're on all of them pretty much as far as I know. How active we are, I'm not sure, but we're on all of them. And of course, subscribe if you like what we're doing. Thanks again to our supporters and sponsors, and of course, you for listening. It's super appreciated. And we will talk to you again next week or sooner. Thanks. Bye.
Bye-bye.